Simon Carkeek, PracMedNZ.com. From chaos to control, mastering first aid in real emergencies. In this episode, I sat down with Simon Carkeek from PracMed, a New Zealand-based company focused on practical first aid training. Simon shares how PracMed's hands-on evidence-based approach has saved 127 lives at the time of this show by emphasizing essential skills like bleeding control and airway management. The discussion covers the importance of confidence, real-world scenarios, and mental health support for responders. Simon also talks about his military background, the company's high training standards, and their mission to empower people to act decisively in emergencies, both in New Zealand and around the world. In Simon's words, it all began with a vision of a better way. After spending nearly 7 years working in hostile environments around the globe, I returned home and started working in industry training. Simon saw firsthand how poor the quality training was in New Zealand and how many organisations treat courses as, air quotes, tick the box exercises only for compliance. He knew that in order to save more New Zealanders from preventable death, Kiwis needed to be given the knowledge and opportunity for engaging relevant training. His goal is to ensure there are more competent and confident responders and less qualified witnesses. And so in 2018, PracMed NZ was born. You can check out Simon on the show links below. Please click on those. His website, PracMedNZ.com, on LinkedIn, that one's a bit big to say here, and on YouTube, PracMed NZ. Thanks for watching. I'm Damien Porter, former New Zealand Special Forces operator, subject matter expert, and the How Not to Die guy. And you're listening to my podcast, Straight Talk Mind and Muscle. This episode is proudly sponsored by these guys, State and State for Women, because aging is inevitable, but how we age is a choice. State is the ultimate daily formula for optimal health and longevity, backed by clinically proven 100% natural ingredients that's designed to support hormone health, stress resilience, energy, and performance. And I use it every single day. And a special thanks also to my new sponsor, Michael Mason and the Mason Survival Protocol. Links to both of these are in the show notes below. Catch all my past episodes and resources in the notes as well. Thanks for watching. Now let's get into it. Welcome to the Straight Talk Mind and Muscle podcast. Welcome to my guest this morning. Finally, I got a guest from home, Simon Carkeek of PracMed. Welcome.
Hey man, thanks so much for having us on board. I know we kind of said it pre-chat and stuff like that, and you're a real humble dude in terms of coming through and saying, your guests aren't, big names, but let's be real, man. They certainly are, and it's a very humbling place to be, sitting in the seat, obviously virtually looking through the screen at you on the other side, and being a part of this amazing project you've got going on, which is obviously just sharing that information and recording that history. So yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It is great to have you here, and I love that you said sharing that history. I often say, I would suggest with 70 to 80% of guests, and probably we as well would say that with the other guests saying it, is that if one thing we've said in this whole show can help somebody else, then we've done our job. So with that kickoff, you run a company over there in New Zealand. I believe it has global reach and it helps other people. But you've got a sign behind you, and I'm old now, so I can't see it so good. So what does that sign say?
Yeah, sweet man. So what that is, really, really simply, to those of you who can't see it, that's our values and our mission on the wall. Every decision that I make within this company, every decision I make within life to do with business is dictated by what we have here. So the mission is very simple. It's ad salutem, to save lives. And then we have three different values which we go through. And this is something that was gifted to me. And again, just talking, on the topic of people passing things on and whatnot, this was given to me by one of my mentors. And he's a Kiwi business guy as well. Amazing dude. I've watched his entire journey as a businessman from military as well, move into the business sector, small business, and expand and become, again, really globally recognized now as well. And the values that you see up there, obviously, setting the market standard is the first one. These can change on a daily basis, and it's something that I go through and write in my diary every single day. That's the first thing I do as soon as I wake up, because that dictates what I'm going to do. Then we have their uncompromising service and delivery. So again, if you're having a shit day, we can refer to that. And the last one there is relentless innovation. And I think this is something that is incredibly important, particularly in the business space that we're in, because science changes, evidence changes, techniques and technology change, and you've got to stay on top of that. Because at the end of the day, if you're not doing those things, then ultimately, are you really actually fulfilling the mission that you have set yourself moving forward? So, yeah, that's what we've got behind us, and it's pretty hard to miss when you walk in on a Monday morning or a Thursday afternoon. Doesn't really matter, man. It's all there. So, yeah, that's the values and the mission of PracMed NZ to save lives.
That's really important to have that up front. You know, in New Zealand SAS, the tenants of the unit, the four tenants, they are shown on a daily basis by every operator. And if you are below that standard, you'll be shown it as well to step up to that. And it's important to know your mission. Um, Now, I said home. The listeners may or may not know that I'm from New Zealand and you're in New Zealand. It's one of the smallest countries in the world, but per capita it has a lot of success. How do you, in New Zealand, with PracMed, how do you save lives? Because it's a big call, Simon.
110%. So I just want to, drop on that straight away. We actually metricize this because I think, data is power, and that's something which is incredibly important, to go forward. So what we do is we teach first aid. That's the basic way of calling it. But first aid has so many negative connotations behind it because it has been looked at as a compliance-based topic that people just go through and get their certificate. Workplace company first aid, look at me, good to go. Might get a few extra responsibilities and a vest, marker on your vest or whatever else. But the reality is that they're little more than a qualified witness. So what we've done is when I came home from working away, as I looked at what was being done within the sector here, and I said, this is actually broken. We're teaching people things which are wrong, which are dangerous. We're not prioritizing the things which really matter. Now, from our metrics, we know that we've had 127 officially saved by our training, and that's interventions that we consider definitive and life-saving. So that could be an arterial bleed, that could be, an infant who's lost consciousness due to insert reason here, typically airway stuff, or
Mm.
somebody dragging somebody out of a vehicle and performing CPR, surfboard fin through the back of the leg. There are so many different mechanisms. It's mind-boggling the different things we get called up for. So it's one of these things that we look at, we go through, and we teach people the basics exceptionally,
Mm.
and that's what really counts because it's all good. You can have all the high-speed things down the chain, when your paramedics or your critical care paramedics and whatnot show up on scene, they're going to go through and they're going to do their magic, and then down the line, obviously moving through into the emergency bay, prioritized or triaged from there, and then moved into surgery when they're stable enough to do so. But the reality is that if you don't do the basics really well in the first 5 minutes, which is air in and out, blood running around, that none of the rest matters. You don't have anything to play with. You don't have anything to work with. They're dead. So that is what we do. We go through, we have a mindset. We have three different kind of pillars that we work off. One is obviously training. That we go through, make sure that people train really, really well, reducing the fluff, getting rid of the trash. We still explain why, but we give people key things to focus on. And then we go through and we look at equipment. So, equipment's very important as well because there's a few key pieces. Knowing where your nearest AED is incredibly important to, plan forward first in terms of emergency preparedness. But the big one for us, obviously, you can keep somebody viable for some time with really good quality CPR. For us, and this is backed up by our data that we've collected as well, is that traumatic injury and resulting in arterial hemorrhage or even heavy venous bleeding is something that we see more of massively than the return stories than we do from CPR and airway obstruction. So yeah, for us, it's about getting good quality products out there, not the wish.com or Temu stuff, making sure we've got, legit, tourniquets, for example, dispelling the myths and rumors behind that, making sure people understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, the indications of those, and then, what can potentially happen too as well. Because it's not, slap it on, she'll be right. You've got a couple of hours and obviously acidosis sets in and then 6 hours and probably going to lose that limb, man. But, it's about having that confidence to go through, not just being qualified, but being competent and confident in terms of what you're doing. So, Yeah, really, really basic, really simple kind of way of teaching, and yeah, it's vibing with our students. 127 lives saved so far.
I think what you said there, simple, the basics, first 5 minutes. There's a bunch of key phrases you said, Simon, that stand out. You said you teach first aid, but I suggest if we add to that, you teach practical first aid. I teach people how not to die. You make sure that they don't die. But I teach simple self-defense that works. Now, practical first aid, you weren't special forces, but our special forces medics would teach us that if there was blood on the ground from us or from hostages, you need to do something about that. And I think my first aid course was the workplace first aid at 17 or 18 years old. In fact, I know it was at 17 years old. And that wasn't taught back then. You mentioned about rubbish, get the rubbish out there, or what wasn't taught correctly, if I'm paraphrasing that. Um, that's really important to stop that bleed, because if there's no blood in the system, then putting air in the mouth ain't going to work. I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but other people that are listening will need to know that.
110%. And it's I think there's a double-edged sword to this, and I'm sure it kind of works with your program as well. It's actually a question I kind of sort of had for you. I know you're the one asking questions, but it's also gives people a healthy respect and understanding of how bad things can be
Exactly.
so quickly. And I assume that it'll be the same from a self-defense kind of perspective as well. I know a lot of fighters. I do a lot of fight kind of work within that space as well. I've done a fair bit of training in my life as well. Absolutely love it. And the more you do, the more you understand, like, this is just probably not worth it, man. It's no longer a 17-year, 18-year-old private in battalion or whatever else, and then hell breaks loose. That is what it is. But as you kind of go on, you have a healthy respect and understand, man, there's some sleepers out there, and particularly in this day and age with everything kind of moving forward. But yeah, it is a super important thing, and gives people respect. And I think people generally do kind of think twice before going through. So there's an element of prevention there as well. And to be fair with you, I would prefer that. I have no problems of dealing with first aid emergencies. I've had to deal with some pretty heavy stuff, which is very very personal to me prior to joining military and also after. In fact, this year as well. But it's one of these things that it gives us a respect for how quickly a situation can change, and everybody feels like they're good to go. This is one of the common denominators I see walking through the door. I work with a lot of blue collar guys. We work with a lot of military police, etc. as well, and everybody thinks they're good to go when they come through the door, and that's cool because you're in control. You're choosing to sit down, you're choosing to go about your business and stuff like that. But the reality is that a first aid emergency, it's chaos, man. You don't get to
Yeah.
pick and choose, drive around a corner and there's two cars, steaming airbag dust everywhere, and you got mass chaos straight away, or multi casualty straight away. It's what you do now, and that is where the training comes into play.
Let me
You know,
pause you. Let me pause that, Simon. You can throw out so much information, which is great for the listeners, but let's wind that back, because your point is so correct. So correct. Having too much information out there in the person's brain, when they go around that corner and see those two cars smash, which is exactly how it happens, listeners, not you, Simon. It's exactly how it happens, because it's always going to be a shock. I'm a 15-year firefighter. I put on my fancy gear and we get in the fire truck and we drive to it. And we've got minutes to get prepared. But when it happens in front of you, it's a shock and a surprise. And where I was going with the practical first aid, the basics, is because you will then, as you're so right in saying, Simon, is you'll rely on training. And you have to get it simple, because under that shock, and it's the same for self-defense, that's where there was some similarity, is you revert down to the lowest level of skill and knowledge. And I'll give an example for listeners. And you said you've gone through that just way back when you were young, but also just this year, which is, gosh, April. Hello. My neighbor, epileptic. he's had a few falls from lowered consciousness, but he's never had a seizure. And I've never gone to a seizure in progress. At 17 years old, I watched the videos of a grand mal that's a full on epileptic seizure. Well, lo and behold, I came around the corner one day and boom, he was having a grand mal seizure. Um, I've never ever treated one. I've done first aid courses every year and high end first aid with the special forces as well. I never seen one, but it was just like the videos I'd seen, Simon. So
Mm.
I went, yep, revert to the lowest level because I never experienced. I've got no experience, zero experience. I've just watched videos and trained through that, but no real time experience. And it was just like the video, and I reverted to the lowest level. And then afterwards, you think, what else could I have done? There wasn't much, but that video replayed on my head of what to do with him, and it was just keep him safe. He'd stopped fidgeting so much. He was literally glitching in his brain, a bit of froth coming out of his mouth, and he just needed rest and reassurance. Just stay there, talking to him. He didn't understand my name, didn't understand what the hell he was seeing. His brain was glitching, and it was just doing what I'd been trained to do from that correct training, and I couldn't step up above it, Simon. I couldn't suddenly go, oh, I'll go get my trauma kit and I'll be a paramedic because that wasn't possible. So you're so right, and it's a surprise. It's got to be practical. It's got to be basic, and the correct training, which is why I've got you on here. I want to find out the difference between how you at PracMed train your individuals. You've saved 127, I think was the number, known lives saved. How is it different than some St. John's, not paramedic, teaching basic first aid? What's the difference here? Because I really want the listeners to know that.
Yeah, man. So I just want to just jump on what you said real quick there. So the experience that you went through with your neighbour, if you break down all of what you just said very, very simply and refer back to what I said earlier, air in and out,
Mm,
round, round. So that is exactly how we do it. So we simplify, we reduce, and the reality in terms of going through and being so successful in training is that we go through, obviously, we're an NZQA, New Zealand Qualification Authority, Cat 1 provider, we've been audited and all that stuff. But what we do is we go slightly further than that because we don't believe that that's actually the standard. So all of our courses, if you look online, you'll see NZQA accredited, blah, blah, blah. For instance, level 1 first aid, but then you'll see a plus at the end of it. So what we've done is we've integrated into it, obviously our own organic Stop the Bleed program here in New Zealand. We've gone through and successfully hold the trademark on that, and there's good reason for that because at that stage nobody owned a trademark on it. However, it was something that we could see in the future was going to be obviously adopted or taken by a lot of people, and there has been many attempts on that. And the problem is that when you go through and allow other people just to take something, you don't know the quality behind it. So we've maintained the quality through basically ownership or stewardship of that. In terms of how we train, it's very, very practical, as the name of the company may suggest, PracMed. From the get-go, you're basically straight into it. We focus on the big two, massive hemorrhage and airway management, because at the end of the day, and you very well correctly said it, there's very little you can do outside of that.
mm,
You can go through and within the massive hemorrhage kind of sphere, we teach traumatic hypothermia, very different to, environmental hypothermia. We go through and do all that stuff. So, there's a lot more to it than just simply, chuck a TQ on, pack a wound, go through, use chest seal, proper bandaging techniques, how to check them properly, all that kind of stuff, which is really quite basic stuff. Everybody should know how to do that. However, only 5% of New Zealand does. So
here we go.
that's a crazy stat. Only 5% of New Zealand trains in first aid. Of that 5%, how well are they trained? Geez, I don't know. But anyway, so what we do is very, very practical. We invest incredibly heavily in not only course development, course structure, and the platforms that we use to get that across. We also invest incredibly heavily in the trainers that we have. We have incredibly high standards, and it's all driven by this the values, and the mission, which is sitting behind us. So yeah, very, very hands-on. The trainers are the big one, and the actual devices that we use within the company to go through and train this stuff. So, for example, wound packing trainers, or your blue TQ. So you're learning how to move a body around you're learning how to go through and create gaps. Kind of the one that I like is if you don't have space, create space, and jujitsu kind of terminology there, but it's the same with applying tourniquets and bandages and stuff like that. Is that if you don't go through and you don't use it on somebody on the ground, if all you're doing is on a a pool noodle or whatever, which is unfortunately what the fire service here get trained with. How are you supposed to go through and be effective with them? Because again, those basics, there is stuff which is going to trip people over,
Yeah.
and if you have the confidence to put your hands on somebody and go through and do it, it's very, very safe. We have our precautionaries at the start, but yeah, very practical, very engaging, and there's not much sitting around. So, it's a big day.
Thank you for answering that. You touched on something towards the end there. If you're confident to put hands on someone, and it's the same with battle inoculation. That's a fancy term for you're just exposed to stress, and you need to be exposed to stress both in first aid and in the military to go and fight, or in the police to go and do the job, talk to some bad gang guy, or in a self-defense situation. But I just wanted to tie a bow in that first aid situations versus violence. You know, social media, especially America, they love all the awesome shooting videos, and they're great at it, and they love the all the videos where the bad guy gets his car, air quotes karma.
Mm,
But I personally have had one violent situation in my 15 or so years here in Australia versus at least 20 first aid situations, and 9 to 10 of them being where I had to pull out my three med bags, the trauma kit and the little med kits. So first aid happens all the time.
mm,
You touched on quite a while back about AEDs, the defibrillator.
mm,
There was a case of a courier pulling up at a fire station, opposite a fire station, sorry, here in Perth, at a local business, and he got out of the vehicle and dropped to the ground. The panel beaters from that business ran to the fire station and said, "Can you help?" The guys ran out with the AED and, again, air quotes, saved his life.
mm.
Early intervention and knowing what to do is simple. These guys had never used it on a real person, but they just referred back to their training. They would have been stressed out, surprised, and all these things. Working a team made a big difference when you get to work off someone else. But first aid situations, that's the point I'm making here, they happen all the time. Be it um, gosh, what did I have at rugby the other day with the 9 and 10 year olds? One boy had taken a knock. Everybody's really worried about him, but on assessment there was no head trauma. He's just taken a bit of a knock, and he hasn't hardly even got a headache. But it could be much worse. It could be completely different. But the first aid situations happen all the time, from, as you said, a cardiac arrest, as we mentioned with the AED there, to a car crash. And car crashes happen all the time. So with 5% being the stat, Simon, that's pretty poor.
Mm.
Um, there's a great bodyguard in the UK, and he teaches, or his idea is that everybody learns to swim, everybody should learn self-defense and first aid. I think those three things are vital to save your own life. But the first aid is also saving the lives of others, which is what you've got there, circling back, to save lives.
Yeah, 110%, man. I think all vital skills, and I just want to kind of jump back on what you said as well. Sorry, we're going back and forth a
Mm,
little ping pong here, but you made reference to the military, and this is something that training for me in the military was an interesting one. I spent just under 11 years. It was great. Did 4 deployments, and honestly, I didn't really take training that seriously until I saw the first decent incident where somebody was trying to kill us, and I was like,
mm,
"Holy fuck!" Excuse my language. And everything was pretty much exactly like the way it had been trained on the pre-deployment.
mm,
And I was like, wow, okay, this actually happened. Radio, cool. So we went through the process, went through the drills, everything got smoothed out, but it was just such an acid trip, and it was like it was a genuine acknowledgement at that point in my life that training actually kind of really does work, with all the stuff. You go through the motions. I mean, it's very hard to take things kind of seriously. Well, I found it quite hard to take things seriously, especially by some of the people who are delivering these courses, and they look like just a giant freaking hamburger which is falling in pieces. It's like, oh, they just have no cred within the battalion or wherever else, and then next minute. you know, yeah, some of these people actually might know what they're talking about or what they've regurgitated. It may be something that you want to listen to. So that was kind of the awakening. And that is something that we certainly, because I mean, I think we only have one trainer within the company, the entire company at this point, who is not military background. Yeah, there's only one. So, and that's not to say it's like we're trying to, preferentially hire military folk or whatever else, because I'm sure that's probably illegal from an employment, kind of it's just legitimately we've attempted to have other people come through, and we have a ridiculous washout rate. And it's kind of almost seems silly because it's like just a first aid course, but only around about 33% of the people who have applied and gone through and been moderated actually get through. So again, in terms of setting those standards, it's something which it's an easy conversation if they don't get through. It's an easy conversation to get through, but that is something which is massively important. There was another point you just had as well, self-aid. And this is something that we focus on massively. And a fair few of these wins, and that's what I refer to them as wins, when somebody saves a life, because that's what it is going through and actually, self-applying tourniquet or going through and, doing whatever they needed to do to square themselves away in that initial moments, before somebody could get on top of them. So, yeah, it's a very, very, very important thing to do. And again, there is some personal tragedy involved with the recognition to do better. I did a lot of first aid courses when I was young. I was a lifeguard, all this other stuff like that. And obviously met some pretty heavy stuff when I was younger, as I kind of alluded to before. And I felt completely hopeless, like helpless rather. I was like, holy shit, I don't know what to do at this point. Gone through these little certificates and stuff like that, and as somebody you really care about and that you love, you're watching them die in front of you, and that's heavy shit. So again, it's kind of fueled by that to a degree, but it's also recognizing a gap within market and knowing that we can actually do better for Kiwis. And every single course that we run, these courses around the country being run today, that we're making New Zealand a better place. So yeah.
Thanks for being so open about your why. I'd suggest is the reasoning there of what you do. I find that people talking in the first aid space about their experiences, they become the best instructors that I've found for teaching me. We're the special forces instructors, absolutely brilliant. And then in the fire brigade, we're lucky enough that here we'll get people people presenting private courses like yourselves, but they'll be hired from a possible 20-year paramedic. And they'll go, yep, this is what I'm teaching about wound packing and tourniquets. But last year when we had to tourniquet this guy, we had to put 2 on because of this, this, and this, and so on and so on and so on. And relating a practical experience there that they've been through, I've found so often helps in just putting a file in my head that I can possibly access down the road. And again, that's what I try and do with self-defense. If I show you a video, you're on my Instagram, and you've seen one thing, it might help you have that file in your head. You talked about your background. You mentioned about being in the military, and that was a nice segue because that's where I wanted to go. We've established that first aid is important, practical first aid is better, and keep it simple and have it trained and presented to you properly. But what makes, you said a grunt, I think, at one stage. What's your background from being in the army, the New Zealand Army, which is a very small one? How are you doing this stuff, and why are you not like Dr. Dan Pronk? Why are you not a medic? I don't think you're a medic in the army. So what gives you the right and background to be able to teach this stuff, Simon?
What gives me the right? Well, I think it's for me, I've always looked at it pretty simply. I didn't really kind of have a plan going in military. I was just like, there really was only kind of two options, and the second option wasn't good. So, that wasn't an official thing, but looking at, particularly in hindsight as a veteran, looking at where things are at today, looking at associates and also family, so-called family members as well, what they've chosen to do with themselves. Military was the way to go. So basically, dived in infantry. I don't think there was much of an option, to be fair, because ultimately school wasn't really kind of my forte. So dived into the army. Didn't have a plan. I was just like, I'll just dive in there, and they'll probably be me for life. And it probably would have been, to be fair. If 2012 hadn't been handled so poorly, and that was obviously in relation to the casualties the fatalities and deaths overseas, which were just managed just terribly. So yeah, that we could go into that in a whole podcast. My involvement with that, what I saw, and also the aftermath and the fallout of that as well. But in terms of going through, I kind of, when I decided to get out, I came to kind of the decision, or made the decision, that look, there's probably going to be a lot of other shooters out there, and because I'm not a tier one guy or anything like that, how do you go through and distinguish yourself from everybody else? How are you going to
Mm.
go through and actually, get onto a contract? How are you going to go through and actually sell yourself? Because on paper, nobody actually gives a shit. Everyone's like, oh, oh, we've got some guy from New Zealand here, which costs a lot to fly to, insert, country here. But the reality was that one thing that I saw, and one thing that I've been quite, interested in within military as well, was going through and learning a bit of medicine. And that,
Mhm.
to me, kind of made sense now. It's logical. So I dived on board of that. And a lot of what I did in terms of contracting moving forward was to do with basically, well, med. And that was either embedded within a team, or in some cases, bloody dangerous when I think back on it, but, covering for site medics, going through and, just being on standby, never really had to do anything. Somebody might, come through with a cut finger or something stupid like that, but nothing crazy. So got really lucky there. But, had some amazing mentors, had some incredible mentors out there, some really good experiences, some really not good experiences, and saw what really worked and what didn't work very, very quickly. So it was kind of that, and then got to a point where I realised that contracting is dying very much so, and had to make a plan to move on. So came back to NZ, and the rest is kind of history. Realised very, very quickly how broken the syllabus was here, and it just needed to freshen up. I mean, there's still stuff being taught today which is just horrifically incorrect, but we're doing our best, again, by setting market standard, to make change, because I know that I can't train everybody here in NZ. So yeah, what gives me the right? I think probably, yeah, we've got a few fans out there. No doubt, have a bit of a crack and stuff every now and again. If you're not doing it right, or if you're not doing it correctly, you won't have these people worrying you. But anyway, what I've found is people do attack that. They're like, this guy's just a dumb grunt or whatever else. What's he doing teaching people, point of injury care, or T-TRIC or whatever else? Well, my question is, and frankly, why the fuck hasn't anybody else, done anything about it in the years prior? It's not like the stuff was brand new. It was being taught in the mid 2000s, and before that, the late kind of 2000, 2006 tourniquets come into play. 2007, 2008, they started getting issued in NZDF. Freaking, I don't know when wound packing started getting taught in NZDF, but it was probably around about, I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, the general soldier needs to know the stuff. The general public needs to know the stuff as well. What's the difference between somebody getting shot, blown up, versus a car crash? Yes, there is obviously going to be differences down the line, but objectively, when you're dealing with it on the X, it's fucking simple, man. We need to keep the airway open, or maintain an airway, and we need to make sure that blood is being retained within the body. It's that simple. So, what we teach is not, we don't go through and just smash topics and just belt feed everything. It's very, very objective based. Again, what is your problem, and what do you need to fix it? Like,
Yep.
here's a range of options. We're going to give you options. If option one doesn't work, then try option two. Option two doesn't work, then go to three, or maybe a combination of them. It's just, but they all work. They're all very, very definitive. So yeah, that's what gives me the right. Well, nobody else was doing it, so somebody had to step up, lead, follow, get out of the way. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, you definitely do it. And it was a rough way of asking. It was a two-pronged question,
Yeah.
right and skill to do that. I'd suggest the right is that you're there to exactly to save lives. Nobody has to give you that right at all.
Yeah.
I remember in all the first aid, and I think even here they've actually got a law, the Good Samaritan law. If you're doing within your capability and doing your best, then you can't be sued for it, because I think New Zealand you can't sue. But you being a human gives you the right. But I was so intrigued at your practical experience, and you stated that from seeing a traumatic event there where it went wrong in 2012, and that's clearly for listeners some sort of combat event, but you're training after that with the private military contracting. You see contracting there, you see so much stuff go on. And then maybe were you associated with tier one guys with a high level of professionalism around that contracting space?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the project managers and also guys that in some of the teams and so on and so forth. There was we're a little bit, one of my contracts. There's a lot of New Zealanders, a lot of Aussies. Not a lot of T1 dudes on there, but other contracts later on certainly,
Yep.
especially those guys had largely moved into kind of security management kind of positions and so on and so forth. But there was some good stuff there as well, and some of them are passed on now, which is it is what it is. But some amazing mentorship there as well, and some great conversations. When you're not really doing much, which is probably I'd say 97% of the time. It's not like I wasn't overseas when it was all blowing up in the Sunni Triangle or whatever else. We make no mistake there, or anything else like that. It's something that yeah, a lot of time you kind of got downtime, but we there was a fair few Aussies.
The reason I ask you that, Simon, is because, and you said the downtime 97%, that's planning. Now, what I'm suggesting is that all that time spent speaking to these people taught you how to figure stuff out, how to get stuff done, which I think is what you almost said before, just get in there and do it. And then you've come back and you've realized, hey, here's a problem out there. It's not being taught right. I can figure out the solution. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be Dr. Dan Pronk, two commando and SASR doctor and medic. You don't have to be a paramedic, but you're clever enough. You learned the skills to be able to put those pieces together and then present a package of training, not saying that you are the expert. And that's where I was leaning towards that original question. What gives you the right and skill from just being I didn't say dumb grunt, but you did, to be able to form PracMed. And I think that's the answer, is that you figured out over time and experience some of the problems, but you realize there's solutions out there that you can facilitate to others. Is that a summary of what you've
Yeah,
done?
it's pretty accurate, man. So just to divulge on the qualification side, basically, I went across, trained in the UK because you've got to do your kind of close protection, EP, CP courses, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Rolled over there, that was great. Didn't really relate to a lot of what I did, to be fair. I think, yeah, if I could do it all over again, I probably would have gone different pathways, different options. But the med course I did was great, but it was nothing more than essentially a really crash hot combat lifesavers course.
Mhm.
So that puts you in a position where you can go through and know enough to pretty much be dangerous. And I'd said this before, and I just reiterate on this. I'm not going to name who it is, but he'll know exactly who I'm talking about. He's still working if he listens to this. Out there doing some amazing work, but he was a fantastic mentor, and that was probably where I did the majority of my learning. Because, like with any course, and this is something that we recognize within our company as well, is that 90% of the information is just going to go out one ear, in one ear, out the other. And so, what we use it as is essentially we look at that as a subconscious solidification of the practical skills that you're going to do. But without those practical drills, without those practical skills, bro, like you're just getting belt fed information and nothing's going to be retained. So there has to be a purpose to it. And yeah, that was kind of that side of the house. But I've always been very orientated towards finding solutions to problems.
Mm.
And this is something that wasn't given to me or taught to me, by insert T1 guy here or whatever else. It's just something that I've been naturally very very good at kind of going through and doing in some respects, and probably terrible in others. But yeah, the input from mentors was insane, and that is where I learned the majority of my stuff. And the other thing behind what we do as well is that we refer and we teach evidence-based medicine. So this is something which has been lacking from the syllabus within the first aid world for such a long time. Is that genuine lack of evidence? So, for example, Rice D is still a taught method here for strains and sprains, whereas that has been redacted since 2013 or retracted by
Yes.
Dr. Dave Merkin, who was the guy who invented it back in the 70s. You know,
Yes.
we've still
But it
got
needs marketing in this day and age of 2025. That would have been very well and good. But now for the public, the 95% that don't know about it, it needs marketing, which is insane, right?
100%. And I mean, the same applies to everything else we do. Look at the evidence behind performing rescue breaths with CPR. And in most cases, it has, it's less effective with out of hospital cardiac arrest than
Mm.
it is to perform rescue breaths. You look at people still coming in and being like, I can use a tourniquet, I can use my belt as a tourniquet, or don't use tourniquets, you're gonna die if you use them, and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So yeah, it's about getting that evidence out there, and that's something that we work insanely hard on to make sure that we keep our finger on the pulse. Bit of a play on words there, but keep our finger on the pulse with everything which is coming through, with the various different associations and whatnot globally that we kind of refer to, be it ILCOR for the standard for CPR, be it the different kind of stuff coming out of SOMA, which is kicking off at the end of this month, start of next month, I think. And there's some good stuff in there. But yeah, evidence-based medicine and going through and you know doing the right thing. And we've got a medical director now too. So you were probably the first person outside the company to know about that. But yeah, we've now got one of the top doctors in the country who's our
Brilliant.
MD, and he's incredible. He's approached us, asked us a bunch of questions, recognize the value in terms of what we do. He has a massive background and also including pre-hospital stuff. He's worked as a trauma physician in Iraq. He's been there, done the t-shirt, and got the t-shirt. So it's amazing to have him on board. We've got a guy who's in the company now who has gone through and done some wild stuff. His bio's up and all that kind of thing. He worked in a lot of different areas within the US Special Forces community. Some of his stories, well, I don't even say any stories when he's around anymore. I just shut up and listen. Just like, yeah, man. But he's incredible. Spent the majority of his career as an 18 Delta, and if there's any moss, within the kind of USSF kind of community construct, which is people are going to pick up and look straight away, and there's automatic, recognition that somebody had to work extra hard to go through and get that. I think that's definitely one of them, and that's including observations from seeing how they roll overseas as well. And then yeah, all of our trainers, just incredible human beings, and they get the why. So every course is their best course, and there's that genuine passion behind it. But yeah, you're not wrong, man. It's some certainly motivation, inspiration. It's all a big jigsaw puzzle at the end of the day. Refine what you appreciated. Take the really good parts and then work as hard as you can not to emulate any of the negative aspects of what you've absorbed throughout your life, basically.
Let's just go back to um, what you're saying about the training, and you touched on it a couple of times, and we've talked about it, and it's then doing the practical part of that, PracMed and so on. But what that means is a scenario. What that means is a rehearsal. What that means is throwing that student into a practical scenario of, okay, there's a simulated limb bleeding out on a human. Now fix it, solve the problem. That does two things. This is really for listeners, obviously, preaching the choir with you, Simon, but it gives you confidence and at the very least exposure. But where it really helps, I think, is when you come along to this situation in real life, you can fall back on that as not such of a shock. And then every situation is different. And this is the thing that people that maybe haven't been through it don't realize. Every fire I've been to, every road crash I've been to, they're all different. They're never quite exactly the same. And you've got problems to solve. So here's one example, and I'm talking about being able to think more clearly in a situation. Your toddler's choking. Are you going to think clearly? Holy crap. The first time I had to do first aid on my boy, I'm really good at this stuff. I was a shaking mess because you're emotionally involved. But the more exposure you have to it, and great that what you're doing with PracMed, you may be able to think outside the box. You talked about hypothermia, volumetric hypothermia, I think you called it. Fancy word for the person bleeding out and starting to shiver, right?
Traumatic hypothermia, yeah, it's certainly not a good thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, part of whatever you prescribe to with regards to the lethal triangle or the deadly diamond. I think that's kind of going away a little bit now, but it kind of kicks off and obviously puts a person into a really bad position for recovery
Yeah.
and kind of sets them off, towards the state of coagulopathy, which is not good. And for the
Yeah,
listeners,
there's a lot of fancy words there, Simon. But what I'm getting
yeah,
at for you, for the listeners, is you're going to be at a first aid situation. the situation is different all the time. You're talking about that side of things. Well, when I come across people here, and I come across a 120k an hour closing speed crash, and there's three people with internal injuries. They're not covered in blood or anything. They're just three middle-aged, overweight females with sore tummies. You can't lie them on the road because they're going to get burned at 45, 50 degrees. So
Yeah.
the ability to look at the situation and assess it and go, well, hang on a sec, they need some shade, they need some blankets between them and the road. Or if they're in New Zealand, oh my gosh, you got to look at, hey, I need to keep this person warm, otherwise they're going to go downhill. The practical ability to be able to think a little bit more rather than being freaked out, which is normal, that's where PracMed, I'd suggest, and your training will prove them, stand them in good stead down the track, because when it comes along to the day, they've been exposed to a little bit. And that's the difference between doing an industrial first aid course and what you're doing. Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of what we do, it's quite funny. A lot of the times we have clients ring up initially and they're like, oh, we need a custom course because this is what we do. It's like, okay, well, you know, yeah, we can do that. It's going to cost you a lot of money to design, develop, and implement a custom course. Or we can go through, and I can tell you right now that the mechanism is what it's going to be, but what you're going to be dealing with is, a degloving or amputation or whatever it may be. So, history is a great way of kind of looking forward, and this is something we do with a lot of our clients: is go through and look over the data which has occurred prior, and go, okay, well, what's actually happened in the workplace? What have you done about fixing that from a systems perspective? And if nothing, then maybe that's something you want to look at first. But history is a great teller of future events. So that's an area that we kind of work on, but everything is industrial. Apart from what we do in the tactical sphere, everything can be industrial. It doesn't really matter, because stop the bleed within New Zealand is where we start. That's our base course. It's not CPR or anything else like that. Stop the bleed is the first course. Every single course that we run in terms of first aid has stop the bleed in it, and that's just absolutely important. And yes, 100%. Your training is going to be reflected by your performance when shit really hits the fan. And like I kind of said before, everybody likes to think they're good to go. We literally have a test. We have a portion of our course which is designed to expose this, and it's not to make people feel like shit, and it shouldn't, unless your ego can't fit in the room, then maybe. But when it comes to going through, we run this test. It's impromptu, and it's what is known as Terminal 1.0 Rude Awakening. So it is something which happens, and it makes people understand and realize that when things do get chaotic, and it's in a super controlled environment, when things do get chaotic, maybe I need to reevaluate how well I'm trained, because that is where we see things go down. And it kind of reverts back to the 10-80-10 rule. 10% of people will get up and do something. 80% of people are doing the old, oh my gosh, what do I do? And then 10% of people down the bottom completely melt down.
Mm.
You see that 10% of people get up and move towards a casualty or move into the area or whatever else, but then that's where everything fucking stops, because they are not well trained. Unless
Mm.
they have them. And every now and again, like, you will get somebody who's, ex-mil, ex-SF, whatever else, and they come through and they do really well. And it's like, awesome, this is the standard. How was everybody else feeling here? The rest of you guys, okay, well, let's catch up. Let's move everybody up towards that top 10%. So yeah, it's a beautiful journey. It's a process, and it's something that we all enjoy so much. The real currency, money comes, money goes. Look, money's great. You can do heaps of cool stuff with money, but the reality is, when somebody rings you up, and this happened last year. This is something we're going to be releasing when we re-release social media. Thanks, Meta. You just completely wiped everything of ours. But when we release social media, there's going to be a story that we bring through. And actually, funny, this family actually was just up at my house over the weekend, hanging out. But their boy almost bled out, and it was only the training that they had done and an option to go through and save his bacon. It was almost 2 hours before he got through into emergency department.
Wow.
Um, just crazy, crazy, crazy stuff like that. That is the real currency. And what we gave him wasn't his life back. It wasn't, a good win. What is its time? We're all on that sand timer, man. Everybody is. And this is something that I really appreciate about your podcast is, how to go through and extend that time how to reduce that hold, because at the end of the day, you can't stop the grains coming through, but you can reduce that time. What we're doing is a little bit more time pressure, but it's along the same kind of boat. We're going through and we're giving people more time. That is the objective of what we're doing, is to give people more time. So yeah, it is. It's an amazing journey. It's incredible.
You touched on a couple of things there, and that was the last point that I wanted to focus on, and that's trauma. And then you really brought it out with, my gosh, friends of yours with the boy nearly bleeding out. Now, if we go away from trauma, like bullet wounds, punch wounds, all those things, and talk about psychological trauma and dealing with it. It's all well and good being able to do first aid. And I think from passing together, I haven't asked you the question about what happened, and I'm not going to, but you had a childhood first aid incident that was pretty bad, and there's obviously a trauma from that. I dealt with the epileptic grand mal seizure. No psychological trauma from me. I did process a little bit with some of the fire brigade guys afterwards. They helped me a little bit of what I needed, but it was pretty good. But dealing with, I guess, psychological trauma, I'd have to term it that, because a first aid incident is traumatic, as you know. You talk about that test you have. It's designed to be traumatic and stress them out and watch them try to make them fail. You stated that. How do you suggest people, or do you teach, but how do you suggest that people listen to this can deal with the trauma of a first aid incident, even if maybe it was years ago, or it happens to them today, or happened to them yesterday? What's things that they need to help process that so it doesn't go on to become a post-traumatic syndrome, or whatever they can't process?
Yeah, cool. So I think in my experience, and I have no formal qualifications within the world of mental health, so I just want to preface that with that. Not out here trying to play Dr. Phil or whatever else, same haircut but whatever. It kind of works in two ways. So we do include a small mental health component at the end of our course, and this is a really interesting one as well, because one of the ways that I lead this lead this part of the course, I'm like, okay, this is the very end of the course. And I'm like, cool. So how many of you guys have seen somebody bleed out here or watch somebody die? Gone through and done everything you could at the time, but it hasn't worked out. And you might get one hand go up every now and again. And sometimes when you're running courses for specific industries or groups or whatever, you might see a couple hands go up, but it's generally not that bad. And then I'm like, okay, cool. So how many people here know somebody who has mental health issues or has taken their own life or attempted to take their own life? And geez, man, there's
Wow.
nothing going up left, right, and center. I'm like, okay, so we've just talked about friggin' something which can, as you rightly said, spark off, very, very significant mental health issues
Mm.
and feelings of overwhelming survival guilt, all the rest of it, just so many different complex issues. We have talked about medicine or basic medicine for 7.5 hours, whatever it's been, and then bang, we're going to spend 10 minutes on this topic. So what I do is I give them really practical skills and tools. So this is one part of the question being answered. And what we do is basically something that I stole from a group that I was working with who had a really bad day. And it was something that I watched and observed because, when you're working with guys, a lot of you come together. When a team has a shit day, it's like, okay, somebody's died or, someone's been badly hurt or whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. Come together, and I sat there and just listened into the debrief that the TL was giving, the team leader, for those listeners out there. And then I pulled him aside afterwards because of course there's a few obviously beverages going down range, and pulled him aside afterwards and just kind of had a bit of a conversation with him, and asked him as polite as I could be, and just asked him what was the purpose of that, and kind of what are you actually doing with this. And he explained it to me, and it's something that I've kind of held on to and used very successfully within my own as well, kind of moving forward. But it's essentially what we refer to as hot wash, cold wash. And we have this terminology within NZDF as well. As soon as you go through and have a critical incident or, come in from a patrol, you go through that hot wash process, and then later on go through the cold wash and kind of flesh things out. Well, it's the same thing. But what we've done is we've adapted that. We've gone, okay, so as soon as permissible, after the event has actually occurred, you go through and we go, what did you see? What did you do? None of the shoulda, woulda, coulda, none of the I should have done this, I could have done that. That's just fucking irrelevant, man. And then within 24, 48, but no longer than 72 hours, I found is effective. You leave it any longer than that, people start to linger and shit starts to manifest. But within 72 hours, sitting down and the same group of dudes and going, what do we have to do to make sure this shit never happens again? So if we got smacked on a route, if we went through and if we, got found lacking because somebody didn't do their pre-patrol checks or pre-mission checks, what actually happened, in terms of going through, what can we do to fix that? And that there is such an important thing. And I think it's for the guys within the team or the young guys or whatever else. And it's super important as well for the to your team leader, for your management, everything else like that. Because that buys you trust. You can't buy trust. There's no amount of money which is going to buy you trust. You can't turn around and out drink it. It doesn't work like that. As soon as you lose trust, you're fucked. And that's how you regain it, because a lot of guys are going to be sitting there going, what if it's me next time? As soon as we leave out or whatever else, it's the same buzz. It's a horrible, horrible feeling. And knowing, particularly within the med space, that you have a competent, qualified, and very, very good medic is one of the most reassuring feelings that you ever have. So that's one part of the question answered. With regards to going through and delivering the actual course itself, one thing that is a common denominator, because we get feedback from every single student that we run through our training, 97% I think it is, or 98% at this point, accuracy. But basically what we do is we find, or what we have found rather, is that a lot of students will go through at the start of the course and then go, we've never been involved in a first aid emergency or an incident. And then by the end of the course, it's like you're getting this dude's whole fucking life story. It's like,
Mm.
oh, okay, cool. And it is something that I've tucked away into their subconscious for obvious reasons, because they don't want
Mm.
to freaking go there and think about, their 3-year-old child who was found blue in a room and they couldn't resuscitate, because they can't explain it, because they don't know why, because maybe they were told nothing whatsoever. So what we do is we go through and, all the trainers are briefed on this, they're aware of it. And I've had to do it on a number of times to the best of your ability, go through and unpack what's actually occurred. Because those people coming to you and they're asking you a question, not necessarily for the future, but for that moment in their time. So
Yes.
that cathartic experience of going through and getting it off the chest. And I've had like grown dudes cry, you know, in front of me. And I'm not saying that like to make them feel ashamed or whatever. It's fucking cool, bro. Like you got nothing to prove to anybody, man. But guys who are, letting off this pressure because they've never felt they were able to talk to anybody, and they've had this realization at that point during the course, and they're like, oh my God, okay, cool. Maybe there was nothing I could do. But, and some guys will come through and some girls will come through and they'll explain the situation. They'll go through and give you like basically a case study. And it's like straight away, as soon as they start doing that, I'm like, okay, cool. So you're that person, weren't you? And they're like, yeah. All right, sweet. Let's unpack this. It's incredible. So those are the two different facets that I feel we do with that. And the last one, for me personally, in terms of going through, when I came back from overseas, it was late 2017. On average, this year has been, this last calendar year has been an exception, but every year prior to that, within a 10-month period, I've had a really bad incident in front of me. The last two were negatives, unfortunately. But where I'm super lucky is that one, I have a background in this, so I understand, the process. I understand what's supposed to happen, and I also go through and have like the world's best partner. So I do exactly the same. I come home and I do my own hot wash, cold wash with her, and that is just, for me, is just such a super important thing because again, like I'm no different than anybody else. There's been some instances I've been involved which are super gnarly, and I'm like, I don't give a fuck. And then there's other incidents or other things which have occurred, and it's like, man, I can't stop seeing this guy's face. I'm driving down the freaking road, and there's a face in front of me, purple with a tongue hanging out or whatever. I'm like, oh my God, I'm losing it. So I go home and, decompress, stay away from the booze. We don't do that. Stay away from anything like that and just crack on. So yeah, I know that's a really long answer to your question, which was pretty direct, but I think the topic itself is so complex that I just want to dive on that and hit it, with the best that I can from not only the course teachings and that experience of, people coming through and bringing their own experiences, but also what I personally do, because it works, man. It truly does work.
I appreciate you being so open with your answer. Um, you preface it with, "Hey, I'm not a mental health expert," or so on. But the best some of the best advice I've heard from the guests were from people that aren't psychologists, aren't professionals in that space. And it all boils down to what you're saying is essentially, super paraphrasing, talking about it with other people. You said before, with the world's best wife, talking about it with her, you said at the start, you used all these fancy words that nobody knows, TLs and all this stuff, but you're talking about it with your friends, with your work colleagues. And I do know a little bit about how the brain works, and you're just trying to process it out of a traumatic memory that's going to get stuck in a certain part of your brain into a file of a thing that happened, which is what you talked about with that person that had come across their baby that was blue. So I'm glad that you talked through that with dealing with trauma, because it's all well and good to stop the bleed. It's all well and good to be super cool and the special forces medic at the job, but no good when it hurts you down the track. Um, awesome stuff, Simon. Look, narrated show notes at the start with where to find your sign, but people listening to now, where's the best place to find out about PracMed, your website? And clearly you don't have socials, you spoke about that. Where's the best place to go and get information on PracMed?
Yeah, we're going to relaunch. We'll be good to go. So Instagram, we had just shy of 10K followers or 10K followers, and then all of a sudden Meta decided to delete us and cancel us, which is odd because they didn't really give us a reason for it. They're just like, see ya. So we're going to go through and rebuild the Instagram. We are on Facebook currently, so you can find us there. We're on LinkedIn also. YouTube, which is going to be a big focus this year. Not on TikTok, that's not my buzz, and for various reasons. But we will be rebuilding. Ultimately, though, website it goes hard. So if you're obviously within New Zealand, then look us up. We do offer offshore services as well. Not to say that Australia is a market that we're actively looking at, but it's just one of those things. And yeah, basically that's kind of where we sit at the moment. But Instagram will be kind of, or has been historically our biggest kind of our biggest place, and a lot of our content gets shares around just because it is so basic. But those are the main areas that we can kind of reach out and help people and or help more people via the social media. So yeah, just PracMed New Zealand or PracMedNZ.com is the website, and everything else is pretty straightforward and easy to find. Everything is embedded within the actual website as well, so you should be able to find us that way as well if you want to look into any of those social media avenues as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Simon. I really wanted to delve into, what PracMed was, how you differ from everything there, and then trying to sum it up in a holistic way of dealing with that trauma. We've done that so well. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you being so open, which is great. And I really wanted to be able to celebrate a Kiwi in that space, because it is a small country. You and I know that. The listeners may or may not. But to be a big fish in a small pond there, I think it's important to celebrate them rather than go through the tall poppy syndrome we've got there. So well done on what you've done. Congratulations. We reconnected a few years ago. You sent through some tourniquets and tourniquet holders, and I love the gear that you've got there, and use that or carry that all the time. So congratulations on where you're at now versus where you've come from, and it's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, man. Again, thank you for the opportunity. And, I think this is, if anything, it doesn't matter provider that you're going through. If you can take something away from them, if you can learn something from them, that's a beautiful thing. People stay safe out there, but just be ready. You don't get to pick and choose. So, in line with what you do as well, education around staying safe and avoiding everything as best as possible. But when things go down, you don't have the choice to just walk away or what have you. You don't have the choice. Well, you can, but somebody's going to die. It's a very, very, very valuable thing. So thank you for having us on, and appreciate the questions as well, Damien, and all the best moving forward.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, look, like you say there, life happens, and sometimes you can't avoid it. Hey, great stuff, Simon. I'll hit pause. We'll have a quick chat. Thanks so much. Hi, thanks for watching. I'm Damien Porter, former New Zealand Special Forces operator and former Australian police officer, and your podcast host. Please check out my new project at hownottoDieGuy.com, where I teach everything you need to know to both males and females, at-risk populations, schools, kids, and the elderly, for self-defense, situational awareness, and all-round skills that every good person should know. Thanks for watching.